Yo, what's up? My name is Retro Pat, and today I'm here to give you guys my in-depth review of Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex, which was the first Crash game to release on PS2, and I think that's a huge factor in why the game turned out the way it did. For a quick background, I love Crash Bandicoot. The first three games on PS1 are absolutely incredible, with Crash 2, Cortex Strikes Back personally being my favorite by just a slight margin. I actually replayed all of the PS1 games recently in order, so they're pretty fresh in my mind coming into Wrath of Cortex. Now quickly before I jump into my review, I do want to ask if you find yourself enjoying today's content, please consider subscribing to my very fresh channel and liking the video if you want to see more content like this. If you find yourself detesting the way I sound, feel free to leave a dislike as well if that makes you feel better. But let's go ahead and jump into the review and my thoughts on Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex. My main gripe with the game ends up being how many new mechanics were tested within this one game. It really disrupts the flow and feels more like a crash course of gimmicks. In my opinion, they could have made 3 full Crash games with the amount of gimmicky levels and mechanics that are usually used to break up monotonous ground levels and traditional Crash gameplay. Crash Bandicoot, at its core, is a level-based platformer where you followed a mostly linear path, find the purple crystal, and reach the end of the level while jumping around holes, obstacles, or defeating monsters scattered throughout the level. And usually about 1 out of every 5 levels will be a different kind of level, like running away from a boulder, being underwater with different physics, or even flying an airplane. They add these levels to spice things up from the normal ground levels so it doesn't feel too monotonous and solely rely on difficulty. The issue with Crash: The Wrath of Cortex is that they seemingly add these gimmicky spice levels quite literally every other level. You can never quite get comfortable and get good at anything without replaying the same level 5 times. It's tough to understand a game's engine and enjoy it when it's being changed every single level. This is particularly harmful in a platformer where a large part of the appeal is the gradual and passive developing of your movement and platforming skills. For example, in the first 5 levels of the game, levels 2, 3, and 5 are non-traditional levels. Level 2 is a flying level, which is incredibly jarring if this isn't your first Crash Bandicoot game and you're trying to figure out what this game is about. Level 3 is a very easy monkey ball type level, which is really fun, I can't lie, and would have been a great reprieve from a traditional Crash gameplay if I had any of that yet. The 5th level is a minecart level where you essentially lean your cart to follow slightly different paths and avoid nitro crates, which are those green toxic boxes that kill you. Side note, I would have never known that they were called nitro crates without googling it to make this video, so thank you guys for teaching me that one. This minecart level is just plain not fun in my opinion. I like the idea in theory, but without advanced movement mechanics, without the ability to jump or increase your speed, it just feels slow and boring and kind of preys on you making dumb mistakes because you're falling asleep with the controller in your hand due to the barely engaging gameplay. Alright, at this point in the video, I would like to quickly complain about the absurd loading screens in this game. It makes sense when they are loading the full level and changing all assets and mechanics between every level, but it really showed in the making of this video just how bad they really are. I fully realized during my casual playthrough of the game that this would be an important talking point because you're easily spending 40 seconds to 1 minute per loading screen. And if you accidentally load into the wrong level, or forgot to save, or perhaps making a YouTube video about this game, it's annoying when you feel like you have to have something to do on the side while you're waiting a full minute between levels. I can't imagine how brutal this is for speedrunning when you're whizzing through levels in 1 to 2 minutes, only to sit in a loading screen for just as long as the level took you to complete. I'm not a speedrunner by any means, especially with platforming games, but I was able to beat the first level in around 46 seconds during a time trial, which would equate to 1 full loading screen on the low end. I will say, as a positive note, this is probably the best loading screen in all of Crash Bandicoot. I mean, look at this adorable face. Alright, let's move on to my second biggest issue with this game, which is core mechanics. The amount of time I found myself not being able to comprehend just where exactly Crash was at while in the air was so disappointing during my playthrough. A platform game relies on being able to clearly see where your character will jump and land while traversing the world. The amount of times this game puts you in an extremely weird angle where you end up relying on guessing games as opposed to muscle memory and the mechanics you've been building to understand where Crash would be placed upon landing was so frustrating, and once again stemmed back to this game feeling more like a crash course of testing and mechanics for the future generation of Crash rather than a polished Crash Bandicoot game. The best example of a core mechanic being absolutely and utterly broken in this game is the rocket launcher. This thing has an inverted Y-axis but a non-inverted X-axis, which aren't adjustable in the options menu, as well as being atrocious at understanding what you're trying to lock onto. I'm not kidding when I say that I would literally stand in front of a crate and fail to shoot it for 10 to 20 seconds at a time. This mechanic felt like a joke, and I refuse to believe it was playtested by a single soul. No one would have approved this to be implemented into the final game. Thankfully, you can get through most of the game without ever using the rocket launcher, but on these utterly terrible mech crash levels where you're stripped of all your mobility except for the basic single jump, which also operated differently based on whether you jump from a standstill or a running position, which makes it feel so clunky and inconsistent and terrible to use. Your main form of attack is the unreliable, unusable rocket launcher. So when enemies pop up directly in front of you, you really only have one reliable option, which is to jump on them or dodge them. But at certain points in the level, you actually have to shoot your way through, and it would take me a minimum of 10 seconds to line up each shot whenever this was required. It felt so stupid and totally staggered the gameplay. I already despised any level with the mech suit, but being forced to try to flail a shitty target around the screen, desperately trying to lock on for survival, made them hell. My third issue with the game is the boss fights. They're just pretty bad in my opinion, no way around it. So I'm gonna go ahead and break down all 5 boss fights for you guys. So the first boss fight is okay. You're put into a ball arena where there's 2 to 4 neutral balls flying around, as well as a big red rock which encapsulates the first boss. You're both trying to tag the balls, Crash tagging them blue and the boss tagging them red. When the boss tags them, it also sets them on fire and damages Crash if he's hit by them. The boss will also do decent damage to Crash if he happens to run into his big red rock ball. The goal of this boss fight is to tag all of the balls blue to shower a meteor barrage upon the boss. It's honestly quite fun, but can feel frustrating due to the amount of RNG and weird physics of the balls being bounced around alongside the boss AI, which is very funky for this fight. But if your prediction and controls are decent, you should be able to beat him within your first 3 to 5 tries, which is quite balanced for a first boss fight in my opinion. I'd rate this fight like a 2 out of 5. I think it just ends up being more tedious and RNG based than fun, but I can at least see why someone would really enjoy this one. The second boss fight is utterly terrible. I went back and played through this level and thought, wow, this is actually pretty easy. Was I just bad on my first playthrough? Was I just making too many mistakes? But then I realized you don't have double jump for this boss fight, and realized how unbelievably stupid and inaccurate the hitbox is for the lasers that the boss shoots out. This fight relies on platforming, timing, and hitboxes. That's it. It's very simple at its core, but ends up being the most difficult boss fight in the entire game due to it being made so poorly. You constantly get vaporized by jumps that look entirely safe. It's an absolute trash can tier boss fight, 0 out of 5. The third boss fight was very frustrating and took a lot of trial and error, but was probably the best boss fight in the game in my opinion. The concept is incredible. Taking a Crash original and staple mechanic, running away from something with the camera angle on the threat chasing us down. When done well, it's so cinematic and dramatic, as well as being so entertaining and fun. In this boss fight, you get chased by the big boss while he hurls meteors at you until you get down to your little mech suit, and then you get to chase him back up the hill with a water gun. Each phase, his rock develop a slightly new mechanic on the run down and run back. Very simple on paper, but has a really good pacing. It's not too fast or too slow, and most of the time when you fail, it's due to your own reaction speed and from human error. This boss fight arguably has the best hitboxes in the entire game for any level as well. Looking back, I probably only had around 1 death that was questionable over my 15 attempts or so it took to beat this boss, which might have just been because of the tilt set again. This boss was one of the hardest for me, but also really rewarding, and I feel like I was learning something new every death. I ended up finding out that you can spam the slide button to gain more distance from the boss, which gives you more time to react. I also found when using the water gun, you move slightly slower, so if you just spam it from the start, you won't be able to reach the boss, and you'll have to replay the phase. Using delayed double jumps were also an excellent way of staying safe on the rundown. Really great boss overall. I'd give him a 4 out of 5 due to the mechanical limitations. I wish there were more elements of this boss fight to improve on, but I could see this getting a 5 out of 5. Just an absolute excellent boss. Now, unfortunately, we have to follow up the best boss in the game with one of the worst bosses in the game, the fourth boss. The fourth boss is just a visual catastrophe. It's so unclear where shit is going at all times or where you're supposed to be attacking the boss. Especially during the second half of the boss when he's just randomly blinking the entire time. You know, the same animation he did in the first half to indicate when you were doing damage to him. So now you just have no fucking clue if you're hitting him or if it's just the random blinking. This boss really just ends up being a mixture of shitty inverted flight controls, shitty hitboxes, and horrible visuals. I literally just had to smash my head into a wall 20 times to beat this boss, and I still don't know if I fully understand it. It's really just a mess. 0 out of 5, which really hurts me because I historically really like flying bosses in Crash Bandicoot. Crash Bandicoot, The Huge Adventure on Game Boy Advanced, actually has a really incredible, underrated flying boss in my opinion, and that game looks like it came out of a fucking cereal box in comparison to Wrath of Cortex. Now the fifth boss is poetically the easiest boss in the game. It relies on you dodging all of the elemental masked different attacks. Oh yeah, the plot of this game, by the way, was about Cortex reviving these 5 elemental masks to help defeat Crash, but they didn't have much character and were pretty boring. A good potential concept, though pretty poorly executed. Crash games have never been known for their storylines though, so I'm not super concerned about it. Back to the fifth and final boss of the game, you find yourself learning and dodging very slow and easy abilities to dodge for like 3 to 5 tries until you fully understand everything, and then mechanically executing it is just a walk in the park. Smoke appearing below the grate on the floor? Don't worry, you have 3 full seconds to either single jump or just run away from it. Ice balls being thrown at you? Don't worry. There is literally no way any human has ever gotten hit by one of those things unintentionally. They are so slow and bounce even slower. Laser lines? Don't worry. You can literally just stand on the outer rim in between them and you're entirely 100% safe. The only threatening obstacles are the meteors because they are seemingly semi-random pattern. They seem to follow Crash but will sometimes fall inconsistently. And I haven't even mentioned the best part of this fight, which is that you have to use the fucking rocket launcher. At the end of every phase, you have 1 to 2 seconds to quickly aim and shoot at the boss just so he can jump to the middle of the arena for no reason and just absolutely throw Cortex under the bus and throw him into the middle of the arena for you to just slide under him to do 1 bit of damage. He is then saved by the evil mask guy and continues being tossed around by his partners in crime like a useless ragdoll. This fight gets a 1 out of 5 because at least the goals were clear, which is something that Crash games can sometimes struggle with, but wow, what an anticlimactic ending. And this fight is also followed by a cutscene where the villain essentially says he can still defeat Crash because he hasn't collected all of the other gems, implying they want you to run through each level many more times to collect all of the boxes and beat the time trials. Something I will absolutely not be doing on this Crash game personally. Although I do think the power-ups were really well paced and incentivized late game play while also helping you out on those early time trials and those early levels, it's unfortunate that the good pacing doesn't fix the straight up bad gameplay and levels. Alright, well I think that wraps up my review. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and feel free to disagree with me on quite literally everything I mentioned if that's how you feel. These were just my thoughts and my opinions on Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex, and if you feel differently, your voice is just as valid. If you enjoyed the video enough, please do remember to click the like button and subscribe to let me know you want to see more videos like this one. If you like Pokemon and MMOs, you can also check out my main channel, linked in the description. If you want to go above and beyond and support my full-time content creation, you can give back to the channel via the PayPal link in the description below. Thank you for your time, and I hope you guys play some awesome retro games today. Wait, what the fuck? The Fire Elemental Mask was voiced by Mark Hamill?